I've been working on a dancing 9-patch quilt, and you can see a couple of the blocks here. And I am ready to add a second border to the blue blocks. The red blocks, I made one sample block already that has 2 different borders, and I am getting ready to put these sashing strips, the second border, on with red. The pattern I developed I think looks better with the alternate color there with the blue blocks. So I'm going to make myself some notes and then cut those strips, and that will be my part of the project for today. So I have 6 blocks, and I'm going to work with the longest cut first, so I know I need 6 strips at the longest measurement. And then since I'm building this in kind of a log cabin style, I'm going to need 12 blocks at the middle measurement, and then 6 again at the short measurement. So I've made my quick notes there just to keep myself on track, and now I can cut these strips. So I've already taken my yardage of fabric, and to border all 4 sides of my block it will take 40 inches of fabric, so that's why I've devoted one whole strip for each block that I need. And the first step is always cutting off that selvage edge. We don't want to include that in our sewing because it has less stretch there. It's a little bit different weave than the main print of the fabric, so it can skew your sewing there. And I always give myself about 1/2 inch past any printing there, and my 45mm rotary cutter will go through those 6 layers of fabric just fine. And then, okay, so I do have my 2, 4, 6 layers of fabric. I've just trimmed my selvage edge, given myself a straight edge, and then I turn my fabric around so that I measure from that cut edge. And I've got a 12.5 inch square ruler, and I'm going to lay the ruler on top of my fabric. I'm right-handed, so I'll be cutting on the right edge. That left edge is aligned with the cut border, and I use the horizontal grid lines along the edge of my fabric to make sure I keep a straight cut there. So there are the 6 longest pieces I need. I'll set those aside, and then I can lay these strips out flat. And I'm just giving a finger press to that fold line. I don't have my iron turned on, so I'm not going to press that fabric completely, but getting a little bit of that ridge out there, since this fabric has been folded up for a long time. Just by finger pressing there will relieve some of that fold and give me a better, more accurate cut. And then the medium size cut, I will do the same thing. I'm going to line up my ruler on the cut edge and then cut on the right hand side. The way I do that is I line up the grid line of my fabric. I'm trying to get here where I'm not in the glare from my overhead lights and the spinning fan. I'm going to line up that grid line right on top of the fabric. I don't go to the inside, I go right on top of that edge of fabric there, because the width of that mark on my ruler is about the amount of thread that you will sew with, and so you maintain the accuracy, the size of your pieces there, just by taking that time to line up that mark. Accurate cutting and accurate piecing gives you accurate quilt blocks when you are done. And you may be wondering about this white tape on my ruler. That's actually an old address label. When we first moved into our house, you know, they send all those freebies to you, and I just kept that those spares and stuck one right there on my ruler one day when I was going to a class. That way my rulers are marked and I can remember to bring my supplies home. It's kind of faded out on that ruler. I'll take a Sharpie and put my name on things. That helps since I have a fairly unusual name. I've only met a handful of Andys in my life, so I can generally count on having a unique label. If you're, you know, my mom is a Mary, so there are typically one or two in a crowd if you're looking for Marys, but that's when you get the really pretty, like, beaded tags or ribbons. You can tie a certain color ribbon, kind of the same concept of having luggage tags on your luggage to help you claim them at the airport. Okay, and we're ready for our shortest cut. So I do that, and I have just a little bit left over that I'll throw in my scrap pile. The final tip I have for cutting is that you notice I was always measuring my markings off of a ruler and not off of the mat. Your cutting mat can sometimes get warped and it may not have as accurate measurements as the stiff plexiglass of your ruler. So I always recommend people to make their measurements from the ruler and not from the mat. And you may wonder, well, what if I only have, reach across to my other rulers, what if I only have a 6.5 inch wide? Well, especially these long rulers, you can turn, instead of measuring the width here, turn your ruler and measure the long way. That will allow you to save money. You don't need to spend extra money on extra rulers in every size because you've got a 24-inch ruler here. So that will work for cutting some of those other strips. And I am going to start sewing in just a minute after I cut one more strip and get those last pieces there. My strips, I'm going to be sewing these on my 9 patches as a in a log cabin style. So you add pieces around all 4 sides, and I'll explain as I go. I don't have my fabric organized quite right here, so you'll see me doing a little bit of juggling there. And I've got a scrap block going underneath my needles for when I chain piece. So I've cut the strip the same size as my 9 patch, and when I sew borders, I like to keep the solid fabric down so that I can see my seams as they pass under the needle and make sure everything stays flat and lined up. And I'll just do a couple blocks here so you can get the feel for how I do my chain piecing. I'm not pinning at this point since I'm going to be trimming these blocks. Accuracy is not super important. And as an experienced quilt maker, I can hold my fabric and guide it underneath the machine without it shifting too much. So if you are concerned about your fabric shifting as you sew, definitely add some pins to your pieces there. I just am comfortable enough not to be doing that at this point. So I've got my first border on and I'm going to finger press. So I've got my first piece on, and then my second piece, as I match up my fabrics here, I'm just going to turn 90 degrees and sew to the next side. So there was a little bit of quilt math involved in planning those sizes for that, but that will all be explained in the pattern coming soon. So the layout I chose, hopefully you can hear over the rattling of the machine. The layout I chose uses 18 blocks total, 18 9 patches. So I'm using 12 red and 6 blue in my layout. It's going to be an on-point quilt. So hopefully I've got everybody intrigued and excited about upcoming show and tell. And there was a survey going around one of my quilt groups that I follow online, asking if you like to sew with friends. And you guys are as good as it gets for me lately. Being a working mom, I don't get a lot of time to go out anywhere and sew in a group or with a guild. I have been early on in my quilting career. I did go to retreats and I was an active member of a guild. So those are always fun sewing days. I love sewing with my friends, just having that time to spread out and see what everybody's working on and chat. But I haven't been able to do that. As I said, I am a working mom. I have a full-time job that takes me away from my sewing room Monday through Friday, and an active daughter who keeps me busy with other activities, so I don't have a whole lot of time just for me, but you make do. And there are a lot of online quilt groups, and they do virtual quilt sew-along times. I know Bonnie Hunter has a quilt cam occasionally, and if you are on YouTube, you can check out the Stitch TV show, and they do a virtual sew-in, so you can get your community sewing time online. Okay, we're ready for this last edge, so I started with the width of my block. That was the first piece. The second piece was the width of my block plus the width of my border, and you do that on sides 2 and 3. And then side 4 is the full width of your 9 patch plus 2 borders. So that's going to be my biggest piece there on that 4th side. And I'll get that lined up. Again, I'm sewing with the border piece down because I don't have any seams there and they won't get ruffled on the back there. I can watch and make sure that the seams in my 9 patch are laying flat. So I have my 2, I was going to show you my scrap log cabin block that I've been working on in between other piecing, but I'll set that to the side. And then just pull another one of the blocks from my pile to keep that chain piecing going, so I can show you the 2 blocks I made with their borders. So I've got, and I showed this fabric off on day 12. I had a little jaunt and picked up some yellow fabric. So my blocks aren't going to be totally matching, but I am keeping all 4 sides of the square border the same. So we're not going too crazy with our scrappy yellow borders. So those are the 9 patches with the borders. I made the center 9 patch blocks. And then I added a border of yellow fabric, and I tilted my ruler to offset that 9 patch center in the block. And today I want to do the same thing after you can see I've attached the second border. So I have a blue center, the yellow sashing, and then I've added another round of red to go with the blue blocks. So I'm going to cut the second border here, and I'm using a 12.5-inch ruler. So if I was just trimming up my 12.5-inch blocks, that would be easy to do, but I want to tilt them. I want to make my blocks dance. So to make this process a little bit easier, I'm going to have to tilt my ruler, and I've decided that 10.5 inches is the best size to work with for my planning here. So I've just taken some masking tape, and I'm going to put it right down there by that 10.5 inch mark, and come down here to my corner. You certainly could fill that in. I don't want to use that much tape, but I do want to have that visual reference there because I tried this trimming exercise just so I could, you know, make sure my brain was functioning with helping me get to where I wanted. And I want my block to dance, and I want to continue with the way it's tilted. I want it to tilt to the left. You could tilt things left and right and give your quilt a lot of movement, but I want that to stay tilted left. So what I am trying to do is I'm trying to visualize everything here, as well as keep my seams big enough so that the block doesn't look too scrunched in there on that. And so now that block is going uphill. So let me see if I tilted it the other way. I'll just keep this with my original plan, and I think we're okay here. So I'm going to start trimming. Just make my pile there. So I've trimmed 2 corners. I'm going to flip my block around. You can keep it straight there, and then I'm going to line up my ruler again really fast there, since I've got the tape guidelines, and we will trim the other 2 sides and leave the scraps. This method does waste a little bit of fabric, so if that concerns you, you may want to choose a different pattern, but you can this edge of the fabric is at least 1.5 inches wide, so if you find that size useful, you can throw that in your scrap bin and use those scraps. But there is the Dancing 9-patch block all ready to go in our quilt. So I'm going to keep trimming there, and you can see the process. I'm continuing to have my first cut go downhill as I'm looking at it, go downhill from left to right, and that will keep my blocks all consistent there. And you can just, you know, kind of center this. You can get really off center there if you wanted to adjust that angle a little bit, so every block is a little bit different. Just make sure you've got at least 1/4 inch there, so you're not biting off the corner of that yellow that yellow block right there. You can see I've gotten a little close, so I'm playing a game there between this edge and this edge, trying to get that even, so I don't chop off any of my points. That the quilt police tend to come after you if you chop off your points. And accurate cutting and accurate sewing are the only way to save your points. I've been doing a lot of cutting with the same blade, so you can see there I've got plenty of fabric on these corners, so we're not going to chop off any points. We'll just have some wider borders there at the edge. And if you vary the placement of the ruler every time, hopefully you won't, you know, these blocks will have individual personality, and they won't just be all the same, and people lose interest after watching one, you know, looking at one block. The more interest and the more time you can keep somebody looking at your quilt, saying, how did they do that? What, you know, where are the edges of that block exactly? You've been successful with your design. You know, if they're in a scrappy quilt, if they're always looking, oh, can I find, you know, oh, I recognize that bit of fabric. I wonder, you know, what other pieces of fabric they've used in their quilt. And then they'll go on that hunt for recognizable designs. So you can see the process there for cutting these dancing 9-patch blocks. Use masking tape on your rulers to help guide you. And you can watch more of the construction of the dancing 9-patch quilt by clicking on the playlist video shown below. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel to see more quilting videos from True Blue Quilts. Thanks so much.